Hey guys, welcome back to the Farmer Hunt channel. Thank y'all for joining us, and this feels awkward.
Yeah, it's a little different than what we're used to.
Yeah, I feel like I'm on the Dr. Phil show.
I don't know what to do with my hands.
I don't either. It's not the same thing. Okay. Thanks for tuning in again, and this is something that you guys have been asking for, so we're going to go through how we got started in the chicken business, and we'll just start from there and ramble on, and we may have to turn this into a few videos because it's a pretty long and in-depth story. But I guess when we started off, you have any suggestions on how? Usually we would probably sit down with a set of notes to do something like this, but
We're just gonna wing it.
yeah, we don't have time for that.
Our stories are how we got into the business are fairly different, so we'll each kind of go into our story, and then of course y'all be sure, and any questions you have, leave them down in the comment section. We'll be sure and check those out, and then in our next video we can address any of those or go into further detail, so be sure to let us know.
Yeah, because I mean, our main goal is to be as transparent as possible to help you guys. This isn't this isn't an act we're putting on here. This is how we got started in farming, and possibly there may be one person out there that is able to learn something from this video, potentially to start your career. So we can tell you, it's like I say very often, I can't tell you a lot of things to do, but I can tell you a lot of things not to do that haven't worked. So it's kind of something that I live and go by as you live and learn, right? So basically, we have two very different stories like Ben just mentioned, and I personally believe Ben's side, being a first-generation farmer, will potentially help a lot more you guys than the way I got started. So I'll just get into my side, and then I'll make it as quick as possible, be as transparent as possible, and then you guys can delve in, because he's first generation. I'm technically fifth generation. I've got newspaper articles here in my house of my great-grandfather started chicken farming in 1942 in Cleveland County. So it's something that's been in my family a long time. And I often get that question is, are you farming on your family farm? No, I'm not. This technically was my uncle's farm, but it's not like I'm fifth generation on the same piece of ground. It's a completely separate piece of ground. I'm just a fifth generation farmer. So basically, after high school, I went to the University of Georgia, had been there 2 years. My parents attended church with a family that decided that it was time for them to get out of the chicken business. I was enjoying the University of Georgia, doing well in college, and randomly got a phone call that, hey, some friends of ours want to sell their farm. So at the time, I was 20 years old in college, not expecting to be a chicken farmer. I had 8 years prior to that, told my father I would never be a chicken farmer. At the time, he said, I don't blame you, son. So kept thinking about it more and more, and I came home that weekend and we went and looked at the farm just to explore possibilities. And it just kind of took me back to a spot of my childhood, and I don't know, it did something to me, just kind of it just made me kind of yearn again for the farm. I wasn't expecting to come back to farm. I don't know, that's a God thing. It just hit, and here's this opportunity. So how does a 20-year-old acquire a farm? Very good question. As I grew into the idea of becoming a farmer, I had to look at the financial situation. And my family's a middle-class working family. We're not silver spoon kind of people, so we had to figure out, if this is something you want to do, how do you make that work? So I went to a local banker that had known my family and of my family for years, had known their reputation and how they were in farming, and that they worked hard and paid their bills. So when I sat down as a 20-year-old with the vice president of the bank and ran across what I wanted to do, he said, that's fine. We'll look at the numbers of the farm. I understand what you want to do. But if we go through all this and this works, as a 20-year-old, no matter what you do, unless you want to put a large percentage of that money down, at which time it actually still wouldn't have mattered. I had to have a co-signer on the farm.
Do you remember what percent they wanted down?
I know they wanted 25%. And at a 20-year-old, and we're talking about, just being as transparent as possible, something above $500,000 by the time everything, $half to $750,000.
Purchase price,
Purchase
not
price.
percent down.
No. Sorry.
Yeah.
Purchase price. And which is substantially less than what houses are now. I understand that. And I'll get into that later. If I don't, remind me in the comments to speak about that later on, about buying existing farms versus building farms. I think that could be a whole separate video.
Yeah. What year was this, by the way? Because that kind of helps.
Okay. So I bought my first farm, which is not this farm, in June 2nd, 2005, because I graduated high school in 2003. Had been at University of Georgia for 2 years. So this is 2000. This may have been early 2005 when I'm at the bank. I don't remember how long it took for that transition to take place. It wasn't a very long time. Late 2004, early 2005. Okay. So banker says, we'll look at the numbers, make sure the farm can float itself, because the last thing we want to do is have to have another job or financial assistance somewhere else to pay for this farm. So as long as the farm would financially pay for itself, my stipulation was I had to have someone crazy enough, hence my parents, to sign with me on this farm to say that Eric would pay this debt back. So long story short, it all worked out. Okay. I had to have my parents thank you, because I wouldn't be where I am today without my mother and father, but they signed on the dotted line with me to acquire my first farm. From the point that I was 20 years old, they never had to financially support me one penny again, thank God. But their signature allowed me to get started. It was their name, their business acumen they had had in their entire life that allowed me, for their signature, to start farming. And that's why I say that I probably relate to more of you guys that are already, your parents are in farming. Now, some people may think, well, you were given this. No, I wasn't given anything, actually, other than a long row to hoe. But I will relate to farmers as you'll know how, because your families will have to have equity built up in what they have done. Because my family had started in 1987. This was 2005. They had been in farming. It was my parents. They've been in farming for a long time themselves. So we got the deal done. I started farming June 2nd, 2005. I just had, within like 3 days, turned 21 years old. And I remember walking out of that office after signing, that I owed for that amount of money, and it's a different feeling. It's like my parents want to go eat, and I was like, I don't have time to eat. I gotta go to work. But I don't. That was my option to get in a farm to do something that I wanted to do. But I do not recommend that route, because there were a lot of nights when things were tough, and all I could think about is my parents have enough confidence in me to get this done, go get it done. Well, what if something happens outside of your circumstances? I would have had to put pressure on them to help me. Thank God I never did, and it worked out. One of the stipulations was I didn't want to quit college. I wanted to continue my degree. I was in pre-pharmacy at University of Georgia. My sister's a pharmacist, and I was in pre-pharmacy, and obviously I couldn't do that. My local college here was University of West Georgia in Carrollton, which is about 15 minutes away. So I came back and continued my education there, trying to obtain an accounting degree. So a couple of years into farming there, hence we're in 2007, I got the opportunity to buy this farm I'm at now. This was my Uncle Mac's farm. 8 houses here on this farm, 2 dwelling houses. I had never had really thought about owning this property. I always loved the land and the house and the view and everything that I had, but he ran into some health issues and he sold to another party, yada, yada, yada. And then I just got the opportunity to buy into that. So I was going to college full time, and then purchased this farm and had the other farm 5 miles from here. So at that time I had 9 chicken houses, going to college full time, commuting back and forth, and not much of a social life. At that point, I knew something had to give. I didn't want to own all the chicken houses in the world, obviously, but it was just something else I was presented with. Now, when I was able to purchase this farm, I had obtained enough equity paid down in the other farm to allow me to acquire this farm. So then after the acquisition of this, then I was able to answer your question, within a year or two, get my parents removed off of that mortgage. It was a few years there they had to remain on. Those were very stressful years. I don't recommend it unless it's your last case scenario. And if it is your last, try to find one more before you do that. My parents, I don't know how they never sweat at one time. They never asked anything. It's like they never worked. I don't know. Crazy they had that much confidence. I don't know why. But it allowed me to get started. So after that period of time, I was still returning back to the University of Georgia to attend some games when I, every once in a while, would have an opportunity to. And that's when I met my wife, Carly. And Carly and Ben are first cousins. Their mothers are sisters. And that's when I had the opportunity. I had this farm. I would go to games, and then I invited them to come watch some games here, which is, I'm a couple of 2.5 hours from Athens. We're actually in the edge of Alabama. And Carly and I wound up getting married. We'd like to have never got Ben kicked out of here, but anyway. Now, Ben was at the University of Georgia, and I'll let him tell his story from there and how he came into farming. But that kind of opened a door for him as he was seeing what I was doing. And I had been in this my whole life, so I had by being in it my whole life, my parents built their farm when I was 3 years old. So I had a lot of knowledge of the chicken industry even before I bought into the chicken business. I'll let him kind of explain. That tells you guys, and you let me know if you have any questions. So basically, quick rundown, 20 years old, in college, obtained the farm through a cosigner being my parents. Within a couple of years, was able to earn enough equity back into the farm by paying the farm down to release their name as cosigners. And trust me, those bankers do not want to release names that are cosigners. I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing because they want to hold you. They want to hold anybody that will put their name on something to say, hey, they're going to pay this back. They don't want to release that. So I had to do a good bit of fighting and begging and pleading and paying as in paying down a mortgage to get them to release their names. And trust me, I still remember that day of laying down and being like, okay, Eric, if you fail, it's just you. So that is a great feeling. So I've rambled enough. I think Ben will resonate with you guys the most because here comes a first generation farmer, seeing another guy that's been in it basically his whole life, and he can tell you how his part went. Good enough?
2 things before I go into my story.
Okay.
What kind of time frame do you think there was from meeting with the banker till when you owned the chicken house? Just say first go round.
Okay. I would say first go around, it was probably 6 to 8 months. And one of the stipulations were when I bought that house, there were 5 houses on that property. 2 of those houses were tunnel ventilated. And this is something that you guys are in the chicken business or looking at chicken business will know. Some of you won't. But let's don't get into that. 2 of them were basically up-to-date tunnel ventilated. 3 of them were still conventional. Well, my grand plan was 3 that were still conventional, I was going to update them myself. So that's what we did. And that was worked into the purchase price to be able to have enough money to update the other 3 houses to get those to Class A specs. So 6 to 8 months to roughly to acquire. I may be missing out a little bit. It wasn't much. It's fairly quick. And I think the cosigners, honestly, is what made that a quick process. So I had to go in, buy the houses. I grew in the 2 houses that were tunnel ventilated with the other 3 shut down. And I want to say within 2 flock, maybe only a flock of chickens, we tunnel ventilated the other 3. And the previous owner helped me do a lot of the renovations, and that was part of the agreements. Hey, if we get this thing sold, I got to get these other houses upgraded. So I hired some done, did a lot myself, trying to save as much money as possible. So to answer your question, sorry, probably 6 or 8 months, not nearly as long as it takes now.
And second thing, thought you said that was going to be brief.
I apologize. Well, you can edit.
If y'all have watched our videos, y'all know what to expect.
Okay, funny guy.
All right, I'll talk a little bit about my story. Like Eric said, we met in Athens at the University of Georgia not long before I graduated. So I actually graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture, but didn't really have plans of being a farmer. After I finished school, Eric, who wasn't married at that point, invited me to come live in Alabama until I kind of figured out what I wanted to do next. I thought about going back to school, but really wanted a break from school. So I moved in with Eric and some other guys here at Eric's farm. And that's when I really started to learn about the chicken business. I really didn't know anything about the commercial chicken business. I'd never even really thought, when I go to Chick-fil-A and get a sandwich, where does that chicken actually come from? How's it grown? I grew up in Cedartown, Georgia, about 45 minutes from where I live now. But in Cedartown, there aren't really any chicken houses, so it's not like in the area I'm in now where you drive down the road and chicken houses are pretty common. But basically, I live with Eric. He owned 4 houses here, but there were still 4 additional chicken houses that were still owned by his uncle. The opportunity came up for me to buy those. About a week ago was 9 years since I purchased my farm. I've been farming for 9 years now. Eric's uncle was wanting to sell the other 4 houses. How long did he farm in those houses after you bought the other 4?
Well, I bought this place in 2007, and then you started farming in what year?
15.
So 8 years.
Okay.
Mac and I I had the upper 4, he had the lower 4 before you were able to.
So that kind of gives you a little bit of time frame. Talked with Eric's uncle about purchasing that farm. At that time, it was a Class B house, which, there were some renovations involved when I bought that farm. But my process was a whole lot different. Like you said, I'm a first-generation farmer. My mom's a retired school teacher. My dad retired from the insurance business, so they didn't know anything about the chicken business, and I think they thought I was crazy when I told them that I was thinking about buying a farm.
They thought, or they still think?
Still.
No.
But I talked to several banks along the way, and similar to Eric's story, they all wanted 25% down or a cosigner, and I really didn't want to do a cosigner. With my parents not knowing anything about the chicken business and me not really knowing a whole lot, I didn't think it was a good idea for my parents to sign with me. Finally, after doing lots of research, I learned about joint financing. And so I found this First Financial Bank out of Fort Payne, Alabama, and I learned that they would do joint financing with the Farm Service Agency, which is a part of the USDA. The Farm Service Agency will not loan over, I believe, $250,000 on the purchase of a farm. Obviously, buying chicken houses, you're going to spend more than $250,000. So that's where the joint financing comes in. Basically, the Farm Service Agency would loan X amount, and then First Financial Bank would loan the rest. First Financial Bank still wanted some type of guarantee on that loan, which is another part of the USDA where the Farm Service Agency stepped in, and they would actually guarantee my loan, which took the liability away from First Financial Bank. It's a beginning farmer program. I think you have to be farming 10 years or less.
Which is a government-backed program.
Yes. So basically, the Farm Service Agency said, we're not going to loan you the entire amount to buy your farm. We will loan you this much, but we will back up your other loan. So if something happened, I defaulted on my loan, the Farm Service Agency would be the one to basically come after me. It wouldn't be
almost in essence, they're your cosigner.
Basically, yeah, that's a good way to put it. So the farm service agency was my co-signer.
And if I may interject this one quick one.
Go ahead.
In my situation when I bought that first farm, is I had to move on it relatively quickly. So the farm service agency wasn't really an option for me, because by the time something like that, by the time I was able to make those monies available, the farm would have been sold. So this was the decision that if I was going to be in the farming, I had to make a quick decision. And at that time, pretty much my only option was either don't get this farm or go through the stress of having a cosigner. So that kind of shows you what my situation was. It wasn't like I had time to go out and search these other options and didn't. It just, that was two options I had: either get a cosigner or don't farm. Sorry. Good.
So after talking with several different banks, I finally landed on the FFB Ag and the Farm Service Agency, and we were actually able to move forward with purchasing the farm. Now, this was a long, drawn-out process. It takes a long time. The guarantee of the loan takes a long time. You, of course, have to go through the appraisals, the inspections. There's all sorts of other stuff involved.
Long time is in how long?
I'm thinking it took 14 to 16 months from the time that I had a contract on the farm and had my financing plan to actually growing chickens.
Because I've heard currently that the FSA process now is a roughly 1 year process just for the FSA approval, currently as of March of 2024, and that's from a very reliable source.
Yes, and the way it worked was, so the FFB Ag would kind of do this portion of the loan, and then it would have to go to the Farm Service Agency. And then if it passed there, it would go back and they would do another portion. So there's a lot of back and forth. They didn't work on it together. One would work on it, then the other would work on it. And so it's a very slow process. The USDA guarantee adds another element to that. It ended up all working out. It just took a very long time. So I actually 100% finance my farm. Don't know that I really recommend that. You know, if you have the option to put some money down on it, then that would certainly help with your payments, get you a little bit of equity in there. But it ended up working out for me. My farm was also set up, like I said, it was a Class B farm. There was an incentive if you upgraded to Class A that you were in a different pay structure. And so I decided at that time to go ahead and borrow the additional money to upgrade to Class A. The loan was set up on 12 and a half years. The first 6 months were interest only. That way I was able to get a little money, put it in my pocket. And at that time I was also doing my renovations. The bank held the money for the renovations, and then as I had those completed, they would pay the contractors or pay whatever. So at the end of the 6 months, I had to have all of that completed, had Class A farm, and then from then on, I was making 2 payments basically, one to First Financial Bank and one to the Farm Service Agency. And that was basically how my loan was structured. I have actually since refinanced a couple years ago when interest rates got historically low. Even though I had a 2.5% interest rate on part of my loan, I was able to get everything, I believe, under 3% in one spot. So I decided to go ahead and do that. Obviously, I had a lot more equity in the farm at that point, but without the Farm Service Agency and FFB Ag, I would have never gotten into the chicken business. Like I said, I talked to, I don't know how many banks before them, and every one of them wanted 25% down at least or a cosigner.
So that gives you kind of an idea of how we got started. You know, there's a lot of things that happened since then, since getting started and acquiring and venturing out in other types of businesses that we've done, real estate, cattle. We grew the cattle industry, freezer beef business. But that was kind of our nucleus that started everything. And has, you know, the chicken farm always is kind of like a honey hole, I guess you would say, that allows you to do a lot of other things. It's a base to build off of. It's allowed us a lot of different opportunities.
Yeah, so prior to me buying my 4 chicken houses, my last job, I actually worked in sales for a local concrete company. So I did have a job away from the farm until I purchased the farm.
So there are a lot of things that I feel like we can help you guys with as far as the economics. I enjoy numbers, hence I have an accounting degree. I did wind up finishing my degree. A lot of people said, "Hey, if you come back and you buy the farm, you'll never finish your degree." And I really like for people to tell me I can't do something, because it kind of pushes me a little harder. So I finished a degree in accounting, basically hung the degree on the wall. I use it in my personal business every day, but I haven't had to punch a time clock yet. But there are a lot of things in a lot of different angles we could help you guys with. Like I said, a lot of what not to do's. But there's so many different, and we may do additional videos to help you guys with this if you so desire. There's a lot of things to consider when you're looking at buying a potential chicken farm. I have bought 2 farms now. My parents still farm about 12 miles from here. They have 6 houses. That's my home farm that I grew up on. And they have one guy that helps them, helps run everything. And basically my mom still runs the controllers. My dad still fixes everything. My dad is 70, about to be 71 years old, and still works every day. So it's impressive. And my mom runs all of the controls, the logistics, the finances. She does it all. So with that being said, there are a lot of different things, because I've been able to buy existing farms. And when I say existing farm, the houses were already built on a property with a house. So I've acquired 2 houses and the land, and then the 9 chicken houses. I sold that. I don't know if I mentioned that first farm that I bought in 2005. Once I purchased this in 2007, I was able to sell that first farm in the same. I ran the 2 farms together for maybe less than a year before the first farm I was able to sell, right before the economy crashed in 2008. With that purchase price, I was able to actually buy a house and land and chicken houses for what a lot of you guys are looking at building new houses for. There's a lot of things I can tell you not to do that I would not recommend. And like I said, we can do additional videos, but there's a lot of things to consider. Just like some of you people may have family land somewhere that you're thinking about building chicken houses on. Don't do that. If it's in my opinion, if it's a very sentimental property, you're setting yourself up. It's like having the biggest cosigner you can ever imagine, because then if it's something that you don't like to do, then not only have you got to sell the houses, but you've got to sell family land that those houses were built on, and you don't want family issues for something like that. That's not worth it. But a huge thing to consider if you're looking at building houses, where to build, the availability of water. You want to have county water and well water. How does the land lay? If it's very, very hilly, look somewhere else. Buy some flatter land. Don't buy a land that's going to have drainage issues. But the grading costs now are astronomical. You can buy better laying land somewhere more desirable for less money than you can pay to grade off hills in somewhere that's not desirable. Look for the availability of natural gas. Whether you're a natural gas fan or you're not, options. You want options. Natural gas versus propane. Look at those, and we can go in depth on a lot of that stuff. Also, where are you going to build? And there's a couple different caveats to that. Is chicken farms seem to do better when they're kind of out to themselves. But if you're out to yourself, if your farm's out by itself, it's maybe safe biosecurity wise and not have as many challenges. But if you're not satisfied with that integrator and you're out from the houses and you're not in a desirable location, you probably only have the option of 1, maybe 2 integrators. So there are certain places I have been in northeast Georgia where I went to a farm supply store to pick up some parts there. By the time I got off the interstate to get to that store, there were 5 different integrator signs. and you have a lot of options. In this area, we only have 2 integrators. So if integrators who we grow chickens for, that's who our contract's for. They provide the chickens and the feed, and then we grow the animals, their animals. And you need options is all I'm saying. You need options for water. You need options for gas. You need to look at where you're building, why you're building. And then the same thing you're wanting to look at if you're buying an existing farm. If that farm is already built somewhere, is that desirable location? You take out the grading cost, but do you have the availability of multiple types of gas? Do you have the availability of well and county water? We'll go into, if you guys have more questions about that, just really look at that versus, these houses are so expensive now to build. I would be scared to guess, guys. I'm going to say $700,000-800,000. I'm probably so far away. $700,000-800,000 a piece on a mega house, which would be twice the capacity of what we built. And they may be laughing at me right now. Contractors maybe $1 million. I don't think it would be anything under that. And then you're going to have to add in. So you may be $3.5-4 million in a 4-house mega farm, which would be equivalent to our farm. We have 8 houses, 40 by 500. So square footage wise, it would be like a 4-house mega farm that you build now. Would probably be $3.5-4 million. You think I'd miss that?
And keep in mind, if you build brand new houses, which do they have an incentive now? Some places have
according to the integrator
building incentives, but pay per pound is the exact same that my farm is making, exact same that Eric's farm is making.
Pay per pound there is a local integrator here now that does have an incentive. I haven't read the contract myself. I just hearsay through other farmers of what it'll pay back, and that's something that some of those guys can maybe interject with or tell you, because that's not our situation. So I'm not an expert and I can't tell you, but there are building incentives to help pay back some of that. And basically they've had to do that because of the reduced amount of people building farms, because of the rates, the interest rate hikes, the increased cost of materials to get the farms built. And so basically there was a dip in building. So they had to, in turn, were forced to create an incentive to keep houses being built. And that's what they did. So integrators, a whole different story. We won't start that today.
Yeah, that's a...
Hey, but we have a job because of them at the end of the day.
Sure.
I'm very thankful for that. And hey, they can complain about us as well. So we all have to work together for a common goal. We're just trying to bring you a good product to eat. And, it's kind of like siblings. You're going to argue about certain things and may not see eye to eye. And one person may be right, one person may be wrong. You may both be wrong. But we have a job because of them. My family's fed because of them. And are they all perfect? No. But if you're wanting to get in the chicken business, you're going to have to be able to communicate with them, get along with them. And as of right now, that's the way the industry is. We have to compete. This would be a whole different issue too, or not. I guess it could be an issue, but we're paid on a competitive scale. Ben and I actually compete against each other. It's called a tournament system. 11 to 12 other farms sell the same week as us, and so we're paid on a competitive pay scale basis. Basically, you're forced to always be on top of your game, do as well as you can to perform, because there are financial incentives to do better performance-wise on your birds.
On that same end, there's also, what would you call it if you lose money? There's financial incentives for you to do better on your birds, but if you are towards the bottom end, your pay can be reduced.
Sure. And the way that tournament system does work in that, and not to get too deep into it, but basically the growers that don't perform as well, money is taken from them and given to the growers that do perform better. So it's not like additional money shows up from somewhere else. It's basically the money is shifted from the lower performing farmer to the better performing farmer, and that's how the pay scale works. So we can dive into some of that stuff later on down the road.
One thing I'll mention is, so we raise chickens for Pilgrims, and we are not Pilgrims employees. We are subcontractors. We do yearly contracts, which are not guaranteed. So that's something to consider when you're looking at signing on the line, is you've got this 12-year loan, but you are not guaranteed 12 years of birds. Part of what they look at is your performance, as well as the age and condition of your houses. So something else to keep in mind if you're looking at buying a farm is, will I be able to grow chickens long enough to pay for this farm and then some?
On an existing farm that's basically a yearly contract,
Yes.
some integrators are going to have different sets of rules in what we do. You may build a new farm now, and they may give a contract on some integrators out there that guarantee birds long enough for your long term. We don't know about all integrators. We're just speaking of what we do with. When you buy an existing farm, you basically are buying a farm you may owe 12 years of payments on, and they're guaranteeing you birds for a year. So that's why I'm saying build to where you have options of integrators, because if something happens and that integrator says they don't want to bring you birds anymore, you better hope that you have other options that you can call. Because if you don't, you're just out of the business, and hopefully you didn't build on family land.
So if you're watching this video and you're interested in buying a farm, if you don't listen to anything else we say, this right here, do not overpay for a farm.
No.
Make sure that everything cash flows. Sit down with your banker and look at some worst case scenarios, because in the chicken business, there are ups and there are downs. Sometimes you feel like you're doing really well, and then things may change and you'll be in a rut and feel like you can't do anything right. So your pay, we're getting paid 6 or 7 times a year.
Mm-hmm.
So you've really got to budget. If you have a good flock, you really want to set some aside, because you're going to have a bad flock. Mm-hmm. But if you overpay for a farm and it's a stretch to make those payments each flock, you're going to have a bad flock, and you're going to have to dip into some savings to make that payment.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and the stress is unimaginable. Everything that I've learned in business is the money's made on the buy. And if it's not comfortable going into it, just walk away from that purchase, because base your numbers, like you said, on the worst case scenarios, because I always want to know worst case scenario. I want to live off worst case scenario.
Yeah, if you can make your payments in worst case scenario, then there are going to be times where your best case scenario. Mm-hmm. So,
but look at the best case scenario and see if you're happy with best case scenario. Look at the best case scenario, and if you're like, gosh, that's still a lot of work for not a lot of money, then you need to know that up front. But you need to live off the worst case.
And another thing that's unique about our situation, our farms connect to each other. It used to be one farm.
There's Ben's house.
Yeah, there's my house. You're not just buying a farm, you're buying a lifestyle. So we place chickens and we keep those for roughly 5 weeks. So you basically have a bunch of children that you can't find a babysitter for 5 weeks. Mm-hmm. So if your spouse loves to go on vacation or go out of town on the weekends, or if you're in the travel ball, it's going to be very difficult. You have to love what you're doing, and you have to be dedicated to spend time on the farm. Fortunately, Eric and I are able to work together. When he wants to take a summer vacation, I'm here. When I want to take a summer vacation, he's here. It's very difficult for us to go out of town at the same time, but we are able to back each other up. Even when you think about things like my wife having children, so we have 3 children. You don't know when your children are going to be born. You can't just run off and leave your houses for 2 days to go to the hospital. So luckily, I have Eric to back me up. He has me to back him up if something comes up. But that's something to consider when you're looking at buying a farm. If you don't have any help whatsoever, just think about that, because these chickens are dependent on you. You have to be there daily. If you plan on hiring somebody, that's great, but don't be dependent on that.
And chances are you can only afford to hire 1 or 2 people, and they're going to get sick too. And they're going to have things that come up as well. It's not like you have 20 people on staff, and if one doesn't show up, it's not a big deal. But hit on something there that's important is make sure your spouse is on board. When Carly and I met, I had 9 houses at the time. She knew what kind of tornado storm she was getting into. I just, it was born into me, work daylight to dark. That's what it is. It's what it's going to be. That's just in my blood. So I'm blessed with a wife that understands when I say I'll be back in 30 minutes, she'll see me in 3 hours. That's just the way it goes. That's the way it's going to be. She's happy. She understands that, and I'm blessed for that. If your wife or your husband is not like that, consider that going into it, because the last thing you want to do is have financial stress and stress at home when you get home because you had to work on a feed line that's torn up at midnight, and then you get home and your wife's mad at you. That's not a good combination for you. It has to be a family affair. It does make for a good home life, and that's one thing that I yearned for. That was because I always knew where my mom and dad were. I knew they were working. I knew they were on the farm if I needed something. And that's one good thing. It's a flexible schedule, even though when we have birds, we're, like Ben said, committed to 250,000 babies at all time, and we're responsible for that. If I want to start at 3 o'clock in the morning, I can. If I need to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and check everything, or get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and check everything and come back and work everything a little later, if I got a doctor's appointment, if my kid does, I don't have somebody breathing down my neck as long as I'm doing my job. And I've been lucky to have service guys that understand as long as I'm doing my job relatively, for the most part, they leave me alone. You may not have that same fortune because you may not know who your service tech will be, and they rotate quite often. So that's just something else to consider. Make it a family decision. This is not a one-person decision unless you're single, in which my case I was when I bought farms, and then I had to find a wife that was okay with this chaos.
Tell them about your best bud covering for you Saturday.
Who's? My dad.
Mm-mm.
Who?
How are you feeling Saturday?
Terrible. If you guys haven't had that virus that's current, oh my God.
So the stomach bug hit the Lovern's house, and how do you think it would have gone if you had to go pick up chicken Saturday?
Not well. I mean, I went and checked all my birds with toilet paper. True story. Sorry.
So anyway, just things like that are good things to consider when buying a farm. Sicknesses come up, just all kinds of stuff like that. But
basically, our battery's running low, and we'll touch back on the things that you guys are interested in, and you just leave that in the comments. But the way I would approach that, the way if I had to do it over again, is I always relate that and pray for wisdom and discernment. And I think that's something that you guys could find valuable, and look up Proverbs 1:7. And I think, statements like that, wisdom and discernment go a long way. And if it doesn't feel right, you get that little feeling in the back of your neck, it's probably for a reason. And if it doesn't come together fairly easily, sometimes it's probably not supposed to come together at all. So let us know if you have any questions, comments. Sorry this guy rambled so much.
I apologize. We'll definitely do some more videos. We'll answer any questions you have. I'd love to sit down and do a video where we actually go through one of our settlements and talk more about the tournament pay, expenses, all that kind of the financial side, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. I think it's important. Taxes, depreciation, those are all important topics to know for people going into the chicken business.
Last kind of closing thing is, why did we buy existing farms? We were able to really acquire a farm, land, and a house for less money than if we would have built new structures. So if that works in your timeline, make sure the houses are in good enough shape to be able to make it long enough, of course, to pay everything back. That's why we made the decisions we made on purchasing existing farms that were already built. So that's something to take into consideration versus building new structures. Anything else?
We probably should go check on our chickens now.
What chickens?
Oh, yeah.
See ya.
Thank y'all for watching.